Ethan stared silently at the divorce papers, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like the humid summer air. The courtroom was empty, save for Clara's smug smirk and the judge's indifferent nods. He had imagined this day differently. A quiet parting, maybe some sense of fairness. But reality was far crueler. Clara, in her designer heels and pearls, didn't even bother hiding her amusement. "Honestly, Ethan," she said, tossing her perfectly manicured hand through her golden hair, "I almost feel sorry leaving you with that." Her gaze flicked to the run-down cabin he had called home for the past 3 years, a place that had once been a haven but now looked like a relic from a forgotten time. "It's rustic. Quaint, I guess," she added, suppressing a laugh. Ethan clenched his jaw, refusing to rise to her bait. Words would be wasted on her arrogance. She had spent years mocking his modest ambitions, criticizing his mediocre job as if the world owed her more than she had already claimed. He thought of the little apartment in the city they had bought together, now hers, and the new luxury car she had parked outside, an obvious display of her newfound freedom. Meanwhile, he was left with the cabin, the peeling paint and sagging roof now his inheritance from a marriage that had failed not due to love, but greed. He could feel Clara's eyes burning into him, eager for a reaction. She wanted humiliation, a show, a little moment where she could gloat over what she perceived as his loss. But Ethan had learned patience, learned the quiet power of composure. She didn't know the full story. Couldn't even imagine the twist waiting just beneath the surface. A distant relative, long estranged from the family, had recently left him a staggering inheritance, $100 million. It was a secret he guarded fiercely for reasons of pride and caution. Clara didn't need to know. Not yet. Clara laughed again, the sound sharp and brittle. "I hope the cabin treats you well. Try not to get eaten by a raccoon or something." She waved dramatically and turned, leaving a trail of perfume and self-satisfaction in her wake. Ethan watched her go, the door swinging behind her like the final act of cruel play. He walked slowly toward the cabin, each step crunching against the gravel driveway. From the outside, the cabin looked abandoned, almost sad in its isolation. The windows were dusty, the siding chipped, and the front porch sagged under the weight of years without proper care. Yet, as Ethan pushed open the creaking door, he felt something stir inside him, a strange sense of opportunity, even in this ruin. Inside, dust danced in the sunlight filtering through cracked windows. Old furniture leaned against walls like weary soldiers, and the air smelled of wood, mildew, and memories. Ethan ran a hand over the worn countertop, remembering the evenings he had spent here with Clara, when things had seemed simpler, happier. That version of life was gone now, replaced by clarity. Clara's laughter echoed in his mind, but instead of anger, he felt a quiet resolve. He opened a small drawer, finding old receipts, a broken coffee mug, and a notebook filled with scribbles he had made years ago. Plans, dreams, sketches of a life he had wanted but put on hold. Suddenly, the cabin didn't seem so hopeless. With money in his pocket he hadn't yet touched, and a mind full of ideas, he realized this broken place could become something else entirely, a symbol of his rebirth. Ethan sank into the old armchair, grimy and cracked, and allowed himself a small, private smile. Clara thought she had one. She thought leaving him with the cabin was a punishment. She had no idea that her laughter had underestimated him entirely. In a few months, maybe years, this cabin would no longer be a symbol of poverty or ridicule. It would be a testament to what he could build with patience, determination, and the fortune he had wisely kept to himself. For now, the cabin was quiet. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight, and the creak of the floorboards was the only sound. Ethan closed his eyes and made a silent vow. He would work, he would rebuild, and one day, Clara would see what she had truly left behind. The broken cabin might have seemed like the end, but for him, it was just the beginning. And so, with the door closing gently behind him, Ethan stepped into his new life, a life that Clara could never ruin, a life that held the promise of triumph, wealth, and most importantly, dignity. The morning sunlight spilled to the cracked windows of the cabin, illuminating layers of dust that had settled over years of neglect. Ethan stretched, feeling the ache of muscles he hadn't used in weeks, and surveyed the space around him. Broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and a roof that threatened to leak at the slightest hint of rain. All of it was his responsibility now. Yet, instead of despair, he felt a spark of determination. He moved carefully across the creaking floorboards, setting his bag down beside the rickety table. Inside, tools he had brought from his old apartment rattled quietly. Hammers, screwdrivers, paintbrushes, and a few power tools. Each represented a small weapon in his war against decay. Ethan knelt beside the window, wiping away the grime to see the surrounding forest. The cabin sat on a modest piece of land, overgrown with wildflowers and brambles, a quiet sanctuary that, with care, could be beautiful again. He allowed himself a small smile. Clara had mocked this place, laughed at his decay, assumed he would sink into misery. What she didn't know was that he thrived in challenge. The first few days were grueling. Floors had to be reinforced, broken furniture repaired, and the roof patched to prevent leaks. The bathroom plumbing groaned and hissed in protest, but Ethan tackled each problem methodically, fueled by a mix of practicality and stubborn pride. Occasionally, he would pause and glance at the cracked photo frame he had found tucked away in a drawer, a younger version of him and Clara, smiling on the porch of this very cabin. Memories like that were bittersweet, reminders of what had been and what would never return. During one particularly long afternoon, he ventured outside to clear overgrown paths. The weeds were stubborn, tangled around the legs of the porch and stretching into the yard. As he worked, a neighbor, a small, wiry man named Hank, appeared, leaning on his cane. Hank had lived in the area for decades and knew the cabin's history. "Thought that place had been abandoned for good," Hank muttered, eyeing Ethan suspiciously. "Never thought anyone actually fix it up." "I'm not just fixing it," Ethan said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm making it mine." Hank's expression softened, a faint grin tugging at his lips. "Well, son, good luck with that. Place has a way of testing folks." Ethan nodded politely and returned to his work. It was comforting, in a strange way, to see the quiet approval of someone who understood what it took to rebuild from nothing. Inside, the evenings were spent repairing walls and patching holes, accompanied by the soothing rhythm of his own thoughts. He worked in silence, letting his mind wander over plans for the future. The inheritance from his distant relative had been carefully invested, producing returns that were quietly growing. For now, Ethan didn't flaunt it. He let it sit, a secret waiting to be revealed at the right moment. The cabin would be the stage for that revelation. "Thought that place had been abandoned for good," Hank muttered, eyeing Ethan suspiciously. "Never thought anyone actually fix it up." "I'm not just fixing it," Ethan said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm making it mine." Hank's expression softened, a faint grin tugging at his lips. "Well, son, good luck with that. Place has a way of testing folks." Ethan nodded politely and returned to his work. It was comforting, in a strange way, to see the quiet approval of someone who understood what it took to rebuild from nothing. Inside, the evenings were spent repairing walls and patching holes, accompanied by the soothing rhythm of his own thoughts. He worked in silence, letting his mind wander over plans for the future. The inheritance from his distant relative had been carefully invested, producing returns that were quietly growing. For now, Ethan didn't flaunt it. He let it sit, a secret waiting to be revealed at the right moment. The cabin would be the stage for that revelation. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, he sat by the fireplace, a small fire flickering and warming the room. He thought about Clara, how she had strutted away, heels clicking, confident in her victory. He imagined her telling her friends, boasting about the cabin punishment, laughing at the thought of him scraping by. The memory stung for a moment, but then he felt a quiet satisfaction. She didn't know what she had unleashed. She didn't know that her mockery had fueled something far bigger than she could imagine. Days turned into weeks. The cabin slowly began to transform under Ethan's hands. Old furniture was stripped and repainted. Broken windows were replaced, and the walls received fresh coats of color. Each small improvement brought a sense of pride that was intoxicating. Even the stray dog that had taken to following him around seemed to approve, wagging its tail as if acknowledging his progress. During one afternoon, while sanding down an old chair, Ethan received a call from his financial advisor. The news was reassuring. His investments were growing steadily. The $100 million inheritance wasn't just a number. It was a tool, a foundation, a promise of the life he could now build. He smiled quietly into the phone, thinking of how Clara would react if she knew. The thought of her smug face, now replaced by a sudden unanticipated shock, made him chuckle softly to himself. But Ethan didn't dwell on revenge. His focus was the cabin, the land, and the person he was becoming. Each nail hammered, each board sanded, was a small victory against past. He was rebuilding more than a structure. He was rebuilding his confidence, his purpose, and his vision for a life that no one could take from him. By the end of the month, the cabin was almost unrecognizable. From the outside, the paint gleamed under the sun, the garden had been cleared, and a small porch swing hung invitingly by the front door. Inside, furniture was repaired, the kitchen gleamed, and the fireplace now radiated warmth. The place was still humble compared to Clara's luxurious apartment, but it had become a symbol of something far more important: resilience and quiet triumph. One evening, standing on the porch and watching the sunset, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. Clara had left in the broken cabin thinking it would break him. Instead, it had awakened a strength he hadn't realized he possessed. The cabin had become a canvas for his ambition, a place where patience, hard work, and strategy would converge into something that no one, not even Clara, could mock or dismiss. He allowed himself one more thought of satisfaction. The day he revealed his secret fortune to Clara would come. And when it did, her laughter would die on her lips, replaced by shock, regret, and disbelief. But for now, he had the quiet comfort of knowing he had won the first and most important battle, his own heart and his own resilience. Ethan turned to go inside, the dog following closely behind, and whispered to himself, "Let's see how far we can go." The broken cabin had become the foundation for a life that would surprise everyone. Most of all, the woman who had laughed at him. Clara's life had never looked better, or so she liked to believe. Every morning, she sipped her cappuccino on the balcony of her sleek city apartment, scrolling through social media posts that praised her success post-divorce. Friends sent her texts filled with admiration, some tinged with envy, all praising her for winning the divorce battle. Clara smiled smugly, letting each notification feed her sense of superiority. She had left Ethan with a broken cabin, the perfect symbol of his failure, or so she thought. At brunch with her friends, she recounted the story with dramatic flair. "He's living in that," she said, waving her hand vaguely as if to dismiss the image of the old, sagging cabin. "I left him with nothing. Honestly, it's almost pathetic." Her friends giggled, clinking their glasses. "You're so lucky you got out when you did," one said. Another added, "I can't believe he hasn't called you to mope or beg. What a loser." Clara laughed, savoring the words. In her mind, the cabin was more than a house. It was a public statement, a monument to her triumph over a man she considered beneath her. The thought that Ethan might thrive despite her mockery never crossed her mind. Meanwhile, Ethan's days continued at a steady rhythm. He rose early, greeted the sunrise, and moved to the cabin like a man possessed by quiet determination. His hands were raw from work, his clothes stained with paint and sawdust, but every nail hammered and wall repaired brought a new sense of satisfaction. Clara's laughter from their last meeting played faintly in his mind, not as anger, but as fuel. One afternoon, while painting the living room, Ethan noticed a post on a local community board. A group of wealthy investors were scouting the area for vacation properties. He paused, a plan forming in his mind. The cabin and the surrounding land could be more than just a home. It could become a symbol of value, a place that would one day astound Clara. Hank, the old neighbor, stopped by again, this time carrying an old toolbox. "Thought you might need some extra help," he said, eyeing the ongoing work. "This place has a way of testing patience." Ethan smiled. "Patience is exactly what I've been practicing." Hank chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, if you pull it off, you'll have everyone talking, including her." The mention of Clara brought a quiet smirk to Ethan's face. She believed she had the final word in their story, but he was building something far more lasting. He didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. His success would speak louder than any confrontation. Clara, meanwhile, continued her small victories. She bought a new luxury car, upgraded her wardrobe, and posted pictures of herself at high-end restaurants and exotic locations. In her mind, she was untouchable, the embodiment of triumph. The thought of Ethan working tirelessly in a broken cabin never entered her carefully curated world. One evening, she received a text from a mutual friend. "Have you seen what he's been up to at that cabin? Rumor says he's been making big changes." Clara laughed aloud, tossing the phone onto the couch. "Big changes? Please. He's probably just putting a fresh coat of paint on that disaster. I can't wait to see how ridiculous it looks." She imagined herself visiting the cabin one day to gloat, a triumphant queen surveying the pathetic remains of her ex-husband's life. Back at the cabin, Ethan worked late into the night, guided by a single lamp and the determination that burned inside him. Each project completed felt like a small triumph, each improvement a step closer to the future he envisioned. The cabin was transforming, slowly but surely, under his careful hands. It was no longer just a dilapidated shelter. It was becoming a place of pride, a reflection of his resilience and vision. Ethan allowed himself a quiet laugh one evening, thinking about Clara's likely reaction when she eventually realized the extent of his transformation. He didn't plan to rush her discovery. Timing, after all, was as important as strategy. She had underestimated him once. He intended to let that mistake grow into something unforgettable. The cabin began to attract attention from passers-by. Locals noticed the improvements. The garden cleared, the paint refreshed, and even small touches like a swinging porch chair that invited curiosity. Whispers of the mysterious man transforming the old cabin began to circulate. Some admired the work, others scoffed, but all noticed. The subtle attention made Ethan's plan feel tangible. Despite Clara's mockery and the world's assumptions, Ethan felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. In this quiet, broken cabin, he was in control of his life for the first time. He worked not for recognition, but for himself, for a future that Clara could not taint with her arrogance. And in his mind, the day would come when Clara's laughter would be silenced. She would come face to face with what she thought was a man broken by circumstance, only to find that he had quietly built a life of strength, wealth, and dignity on her dime, in a cabin she once mocked. Ethan paused at the window one night, watching the moonlight spill over the newly painted walls. He could almost imagine Clara's face when the truth was revealed. $100 million, a transformed property, and a man she had believed powerless. But that was a story for later. For now, the cabin was a sanctuary, his project and his silent revenge. As he turned back to his workbench, tools scattered and paint still wet on the walls, Ethan whispered to himself, "Let her laugh. She has no idea what's coming." The first rays of dawn slipped through the cabin windows, highlighting the subtle changes Ethan had made. What had once been a crumbling structure was now beginning to show promise. Each repaired plank and painted wall a testament to his determination. The cabin was no longer a symbol of loss or mockery. It was becoming a canvas for something far greater, a vision of resilience, skill, and quiet triumph. Ethan moved methodically through the space, sanding the final scratches off an old wooden chair. His hands were calloused, splintered in places, but the pain was a reminder of effort, of progress. The cabin had resisted him at first. The floorboards creaked underfoot, the roof leaked despite his best attempts, and the walls seemed to conspire against each coat of paint. But day by day, he won small victories. Each nail hammer was a strike against doubt, each repaired window a declaration of intent. Outside, the garden had become his project of equal importance. Weeds had once strangled the land, but now they were pulled and composted, giving way to flowers, shrubs, and a small vegetable patch. The air smelled sweet with the scent of earth and growth, a stark contrast to the stale perfume Clara had left behind in her world of luxury. The cabin was beginning to feel alive again, mirroring the quiet awakening within him. Hank, the neighbor, stopped by one afternoon, leaning on his cane but smiling with genuine admiration. "Can't believe the difference," he said, eyes scanning the improvements. "This place looks almost regal now. You've got some magic in those hands." Ethan chuckled softly. "Magic's just patience, hard work, and a little imagination." Hank nodded knowingly, muttering, "Guess some people never learn. Hope she's watching." The mention of Clara brought a faint smile to Ethan's lips. She remained unaware of the quiet storm building in the cabin. She thought she had left him defeated, but in reality, he was shaping a life that would astonish her, and not just for appearances. The cabin was becoming a symbol of his newfound independence, his ability to transform adversity into opportunity. Inside, Ethan tackled the kitchen, one of the most challenging spaces in the cabin. Cabinets were repaired and repainted, countertops polished, and the old sink replaced. Small touches, a vase of fresh flowers, a few handcrafted shelves, even a restored fireplace mantel, added warmth and elegance. The cabin was no longer a shadow of its former self. It was becoming a place of pride, comfort, and sophistication. He spent evenings walking through the space, envisioning the potential. A cozy reading nook by the window, a dining area that could host friends, and a small workspace where he could focus on investments and projects. Every detail mattered, from the placement of furniture to the subtle color choices on the walls. Ethan wanted the cabin to reflect not just wealth, but intelligence, taste, and a life rebuilt from the ground up. The inheritance from his distant relative, though carefully hidden, provided flexibility. He could afford quality materials, hire occasional help for tasks that required expertise, and invest in touches that elevated the cabin's value. Yet he remained frugal and hands-on, refusing to let wealth diminish the satisfaction of personal effort. This balance of effort and resources was part of his quiet strategy, to build something that Clara would underestimate until the very end. As the cabin transformed, so did Ethan. Each day of work strengthened not only his body, but his confidence and clarity of purpose. The humiliation of the divorce, the laughter Clara had directed at him, became fuel rather than poison. He realized that success was not about revenge in the conventional sense. It was about proving to himself, and eventually to Clara, that he was capable of far more than she had imagined. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan reflected on the journey. The cabin was unrecognizable from the ramshackle structure she had left him. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, the floors polished and sturdy. The garden bloomed with color, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender and thyme from the newly planted herbs. Every corner whispered a story of resilience, patience, and vision. Even the stray dog that had followed him remained a constant companion, a reminder of loyalty and simple joys. Ethan fed it and scratched behind its ears, feeling a quiet companionship that no luxury could replicate. The dog seemed to sense the transformation, wagging its tail in approval as if acknowledging the energy of renewal that now filled the cabin. And yet, for all the progress, Ethan remained grounded. He didn't flaunt his wealth. He didn't boast of the inheritance that allowed him to accelerate the improvements. That secret remained as a loan, a powerful tool to be revealed at the right moment. For now, every nail, every coat of paint, every careful restoration was its own reward, a tangible manifestation of his growth and determination. By the end of the month, the cabin was unrecognizable. The exterior, once dull and broken, now glimmered under the sunlight with fresh paint and polished wood. The porch swing invited the occasional visitor, while the garden bloomed with colors that drew admiring glances. Inside, the kitchen gleamed, the living space was warm and inviting, and every repaired corner told a story of dedication. Ethan stood in the center of the cabin, surveying his work. The journey had been long, exhausting, and at times frustrating, but it had transformed him more than the cabin itself. He had reclaimed his dignity, his vision, and his confidence. Clara had mocked him, laughed at his supposed misfortune, and yet she could not have imagined the quiet power that was now his. He smiled faintly, imagining the day she would finally see the full picture. She had left in the broken cabin, expecting misery. Instead, she would find wealth, elegance, and a man who had quietly, meticulously, and brilliantly rebuilt not only a home but his life. Ethan turned toward the porch, the fading light reflecting off the polished floors, and whispered to himself, "The best is yet to come." The cabin, once a symbol of humiliation, had become a stage for triumph, and Ethan, its architect, knew that the greatest reveal was still waiting, one that Clara would never forget. Clara had always loved being in control. That morning, as she slipped into her designer coat and fastened the delicate buttons, she felt that familiar rush of superiority. A friend had texted her a rumor. "Ethan's been doing something with that cabin." It's different. The vague comment piqued her curiosity, but more than that, it stung her pride. How dare he? Clara had imagined Ethan struggling among the peeling walls, the broken windows, the sagging porch. The thought of him flourishing in that derelict space was inconceivable. Determined to see it for herself, she drove the familiar winding road to the cabin, heels clicking against the pedals as she rehearsed the smirk she would wear when she arrived. She was ready to gloat, to assert once more that she had won. When she pulled up, she immediately noticed something different. The cabin did not look like the abandoned ruin she had left behind. Fresh paint gleamed under the sunlight, the garden was trimmed and blooming, and the porch swing creaked gently in the breeze. Clara frowned, her carefully composed confidence wavering. What had he done? She stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath her heels, and approached the front door. In her mind, she pictured Ethan fumbling with tools, making a pitiful attempt at repairs. Instead, he appeared on the porch, a casual figure in work jeans and a simple shirt, holding a paintbrush. His hands were streaked with color, but he moved with the ease of a man who had mastered his surroundings. "Ethan," Clara said, forcing a polite tone that didn't quite mask her surprise. I just wanted to see the cabin. Looks like you've been busy." Ethan set down the brush and smiled faintly, a calm, almost knowing expression on his face. "Clara," he said, his voice even and composed. "Welcome. It's been a project of mine." Clara stepped closer, eyeing the improvements. The porch swing, the freshly painted walls, the well-tended garden. It all seemed impossibly perfect. She felt a twinge of disbelief, the first crack in her confident facade. "I didn't expect this," she admitted, her voice tightening slightly. Ethan gestured for her to come inside. The cabin's interior was even more impressive. The kitchen gleamed, countertops polished, furniture restored. The living space was warm and inviting, filled with soft light and subtle touches that spoke of care and taste. Clara's eyes widened despite herself. She had imagined cobwebs, dust, and neglect, but here, every corner radiated life and purpose. "I've been working on it for a while," Ethan said casually, though each word carried the quiet weight of accomplishment. It took time, but it was worth it. Clara's instinct was to mock, to deliver a quip about how she had told him so. But the sight of Ethan, calm and confident, undermined that impulse. He didn't seem defeated or bitter. He seemed alive, powerful in a way she hadn't anticipated. Trying to regain her composure, she glanced around, noting every detail. The fresh flowers on the table, the restored chairs, the little reading nook by the window. "It's nice," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Better than I expected." Ethan's smile didn't waver. "I appreciate that. It's been a lot of work, but it's been fulfilling." Clara forced a laugh, though it came out strained. "I suppose you've been industrious. I didn't think you had it in you." The words were meant as a jab, but they rang hollow even to her own ears. Ethan tilted his head slightly, the faintest glint of amusement in his eyes. People often underestimate what others are capable of. It's easy to assume someone will fail when they're quiet, or when circumstances seem stacked against them. Clara opened her mouth to reply, but found no words that could land the punch she wanted. The man she had once considered weak now radiated a confidence that intimidated her, and she didn't understand why. The cabin, once a symbol of humiliation, had become a reflection of his inner strength. For a moment, they simply stood there, the tension thick in the air. Clara's carefully curated arrogance felt fragile, exposed. She realized, with a pang she didn't want to admit, that she had misjudged him completely. He was not the man she had laughed at. He was someone far stronger, far more capable. Ethan broke the silence with a casual gesture toward the kitchen. "Would you like some tea? Or coffee?" Clara hesitated, caught off guard by politeness. "Tea, I suppose," she muttered, following him inside. As they moved through the cabin, Clara noticed subtle signs of planning and foresight. A small workbench, organized tools, even a ledger tucked discreetly in a drawer. She realized that Ethan had been quietly building more than a home. He had been building a life, a strategy, a power she hadn't anticipated. Clara's mind raced. She thought about the divorce, the mockery, the victory she felt leaving him the cabin. And now, standing here, she sensed a shift, though she couldn't yet see its full scope. She felt a flicker of fear, not of the cabin itself, but of what Ethan had become. Ethan, for his part, maintained an even demeanor, aware of her surprise and her fragile pride. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The cabin, the work, the transformation, it spoke for itself. Clara sipped the tea he had poured, trying to maintain an air of composure. But her thoughts kept returning to the whispers she had heard, the rumors of investment and growth. Could it be true? Could Ethan really have done all this? And more importantly, could the rumors she had brushed off so easily hint at something far greater? Something she had utterly overlooked? The tension hung in the air like a storm on the horizon, quiet yet palpable. Both knew, in that suspended moment, that the next chapter of their story was about to begin. The cabin had changed, Ethan had changed, and Clara's laughter, the laughter she had left behind, would soon face a reckoning she couldn't yet imagine. Clara had arrived at the cabin expecting to find chaos, dust, and disappointment. Instead, she found elegance, order, and a man transformed in ways she could not have imagined. She had thought she had won, that leaving Ethan the broken cabin would break him. But as she stepped into the sunlit kitchen, the realization hit her like cold water. She had underestimated him entirely. Ethan poured himself a cup of tea and glanced at Clara, calm and composed, a faint smile on his lips. "I think it's time you saw the full picture," he said quietly. Clara raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued despite herself. "The full picture?" she asked, her voice betraying a mix of skepticism and unease. Ethan gestured toward the windows, then the door leading to the backyard. "The cabin you see is just the beginning. There's more, much more." Curiosity won over her pride, and she followed him outside. At first, she saw only the polished porch and blooming garden she had admired before. Then, her eyes widened as she noticed extensions. A newly built guest house, a small gazebo overlooking a meticulously landscaped pond, and even a walking path lined with lanterns that glowed softly in the late afternoon sun. Each addition was thoughtfully designed, elegant yet understated. This isn't just a cabin," Clara whispered, stepping closer to the edge of the pond. "It's a retreat, a luxury property." Ethan nodded, keeping his composure. "I've been working on it for months. Every detail planned, every improvement intentional. The cabin is no longer just a home. It's a place of value, beauty, and potential." Clara's mouth went dry. She had expected minor repairs, maybe a tidy garden, but not this. Not a full transformation that rivaled the luxury properties she frequented. The subtle elegance, the careful attention to every detail, and the sense of purpose radiating from the place left her speechless. Ethan led her to the guest house. Inside, she was stunned again. Sleek furnishings, a fully equipped kitchen, a lounge area that could rival boutique hotels. He had done this quietly, deliberately, without anyone knowing. Clara's mind raced, trying to understand how he had managed it all. And then Ethan spoke, the calm authority in his voice making her stomach twist. "There's something else, Clara. Something I haven't mentioned because it wasn't necessary until now." Clara frowned. "What are you talking about?" He paused, letting the moment stretch. "I inherited something recently. Something significant." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Inherited?" she asked, a hint of disbelief creeping in. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yes, $100 million. From a distant relative. I've invested it wisely, and, well, this cabin, this property, it's just a small part of what I've done with it." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt for Clara. $100 million. Her mind reeled. The man she had mocked, left with a cabin she thought was worthless, had quietly amassed unimaginable wealth and used it to create something beyond her comprehension. Clara's voice faltered. You have $100 million? Ethan nodded, calm, unflustered by her reaction. "I do. And the cabin you left me, it became the foundation for what I built. Every improvement, every detail, was made possible by a combination of work, patience, and smart investment." Clara's hands trembled slightly, a mix of shock, regret, and disbelief. She had expected misery. She had imagined Ethan struggling, humbled, perhaps even begging for help. Instead, he stood before her, confident, composed, and far beyond anything she could have predicted. Ethan walked her along the path, pointing out the subtle enhancements. The lighting designed to highlight the pond at sunset, the guest house with energy-efficient design, the small orchard behind the property. Every detail reflected foresight, intelligence, and care. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I don't understand. How did you? Ethan stopped, turning to face her fully. You left me thinking this cabin was all I had. You mocked me, laughed at the idea that I could survive or thrive. And I did. Not for revenge, not for pride, but because I refused to let circumstances define me. I worked, I planned, and I built something meaningful, something lasting. Tears threatened to spill over Clara's cheeks, though she didn't allow herself to fully break. The arrogance she had carried for years now seemed fragile, insignificant in comparison to the quiet power Ethan embodied. I thought I had won, she admitted, her voice shaking. Leaving you that cabin, I thought it would break you. Ethan's eyes softened, a hint of pity in their depth. You thought wrong. And that's the point. Underestimating someone is always a mistake. Sometimes, the greatest victories come not from confrontation or anger, but from quiet perseverance. Clara looked around once more, absorbing the scale of what she had missed. This was no longer a cabin. It was a statement of resilience, intelligence, and subtle triumph. A life rebuilt with skill and foresight, far beyond her imagination. Ethan extended his hand, not in triumph over her, but as a gesture of dignity and closure. I don't hold grudges, Clara. I've built my life. You're welcome to see it, but this is my path now. Clara hesitated, then nodded, unable to speak. The weight of her arrogance, her assumptions, her laughter that once cut him down, it all felt heavy now. She had left him with what she thought was nothing, only to discover that she had underestimated the man entirely. Ethan smiled gently, turning back to the cabin, the pond, the garden, and the guest house that marked his quiet triumph. Sometimes, he said softly, more to himself than to her, what seems like an ending is really just a beginning. Clara's face paled, and she finally understood. The laughter she had left behind, the mockery she had indulged in, had been premature. Ethan had won in the most elegant way possible, not by revenge, but by rising above, quietly and magnificently. As she walked away from the cabin, the reality of what she had missed, and what she had lost, settled over her like a heavy fog. Meanwhile, Ethan watched the sunset over his transformed property, a sense of peace and accomplishment warming him. The cabin, once a symbol of humiliation, was now a monument to his resilience and vision, and Clara, who had laughed so confidently, would never forget it. The drive back to the city felt surreal for Clara. The sun was sinking behind the trees as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. $100 million. A fully transformed cabin turned into a stunning retreat. Every improvement, every detail, perfectly executed. And Ethan, calm, composed, confident, had achieved all of this without a word of complaint or a hint of vindictiveness. Clara's thoughts were a tangle of disbelief, guilt, and an unfamiliar sting of humility. She had left him what she thought was nothing, laughing as she walked away. She had assumed her victory was complete, her arrogance validated. But now, faced with the undeniable reality of Ethan's quiet triumph, that arrogance crumbled. Her friends had warned her that underestimating someone can backfire, but she had never taken it seriously. She had laughed at Ethan, at his modest ambitions, his quiet demeanor, thinking that a man with little would always remain powerless. And now, she had learned the hardest lesson of her life. She had misjudged him completely. Clara returned to her apartment, pacing back and forth, unable to sit still. The images of the cabin, the garden, the guest house, the pristine interior, and the tranquil pond haunted her. She could see it clearly in her mind, each detail a reminder of her miscalculation. Every laugh she had shared with friends about Ethan, every dismissive comment, now felt hollow and bitter. She thought about the years of underestimation, the casual way she had treated him, the sense of superiority that had seemed so natural. And now it felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She had underestimated not just Ethan's skills or ambition, but his patience, his intelligence, and his ability to rise above humiliation. By mid-afternoon, unable to contain her feelings, Clara sent a message to Ethan. It was carefully phrased, her pride still intact, but her need to acknowledge the truth undeniable. Ethan, I didn't realize. I was wrong about you. The cabin, everything, it's incredible. I'm sorry for underestimating you. Ethan read the message with a quiet smile. He knew her words were genuine, but also recognized a tone of humility and regret. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he allowed her message to sit, reflecting the calm confidence he had cultivated over months of hard work. Later that evening, Clara called. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. Ethan, I didn't know. I had no idea you could do all this. I thought I had left you with nothing. Ethan's tone was steady, warm, and forgiving. Clara, you left me with the cabin, yes. But it was never about what you gave or didn't give me. I built this for myself, for my future, not for you. You're welcome to see it, but the work, the growth, that's mine. The choices I made, the life I built, it's because I refuse to be defined by circumstance, not because I want to prove anything to anyone. Clara felt a wave of shame wash over her. She had expected anger, vindictiveness, or at least a reaction that she could control. Instead, Ethan's composure, his dignity, and his quiet triumph humbled her in ways she hadn't anticipated. I just don't know what to say, she admitted. I thought leaving you the cabin was, I don't know, final. I thought I'd won. And now, her voice broke slightly. Now I see I was completely wrong. Ethan's words were gentle but firm. Winning is a matter of perspective. You may have thought leaving me the cabin meant something, but true strength, true success, isn't about humiliation or power over someone else. It's about building a life worth living, regardless of what others think. That's what I've done. Clara stayed silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. For the first time, she felt humility, not the fleeting, performative kind, but a deep recognition that she had misjudged someone entirely. She had mocked him, laughed at his modest life, and now, faced with the reality of his success, she understood the gravity of her error. I wish I could take back how I treated you, she said softly. Not because of the money, not because of the cabin, but because I was wrong. I underestimated you. I'm sorry. Ethan's smile was quiet but genuine. Thank you for saying that, Clara. Apologies are meaningful, but what matters is what we do moving forward. I've built a life I'm proud of. I hope you can do the same, without letting past assumptions guide you. The conversation ended on a note of mutual understanding, but Clara felt an ache of regret she hadn't expected. She had underestimated Ethan in every way, his patience, his intelligence, his perseverance, and now she was faced with the consequences. Not vengeance, not anger, but the realization that her assumptions had blinded her. In the days that followed, Clara couldn't stop thinking about the cabin and the life Ethan had quietly built. The elegance, the attention to detail, the combination of effort and strategic investment. It all reflected a man who had risen far above what she had imagined. She realized that what she had left behind, what she had thought was a joke, had become the foundation for a life that she could never claim, never control, and could never mock again. Ethan, meanwhile, continued his work at the cabin, now with confidence not just in his investments, but in the life he had crafted for himself. Clara's regret, while palpable, was no longer his concern. He had grown beyond the past, beyond her mockery, and beyond the limitations others had imposed on him. The cabin was more than a home. It was a symbol of resilience, dignity, and quiet victory. One evening, as he stood on the porch watching the sunset reflect off the pond, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. Clara's laughter, her arrogance, her assumptions, they no longer had power over him. What mattered was the life he had built, the respect he had earned, and the strength he had cultivated. In that moment, he whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." The cabin, once a symbol of humiliation, had become a monument to personal growth, patience, and triumph. And for Clara, the lesson was clear. Underestimating someone capable of quiet strength can be the most costly mistake of all. The morning sun rose gently over the cabin, reflecting off the pond and bathing the garden in a warm, golden light. Birds sang from the trees, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves. Ethan stepped onto the porch, taking a deep breath of the crisp, fresh air. The cabin had changed his life, but more importantly, it had changed him. He walked along the garden path, admiring the small touches he had added over the past months. The orchard behind the cabin was flourishing, the vegetables in the patch ready for harvest, and the flowers along the path swayed gently in the wind. Every corner of the property reflected his dedication, creativity, and patience. What had started as a dilapidated cabin left behind by Clara had become a symbol of resilience and achievement. Ethan's mind wandered briefly to the inheritance he had quietly received, $100 million from a distant relative. He had invested wisely, growing the wealth steadily, but it had never been about flaunting money. It had been about creating opportunity, building a life that reflected his values, and proving to himself that he could rise above adversity. He paused near the guest house, recalling the day Clara had visited. The memory of her shock, her hesitation, and her unspoken regret brought a small, satisfied smile to his lips. He had expected little, and yet he had achieved so much, not for revenge, but for himself. The cabin now served multiple purposes. It was a retreat, a personal sanctuary, and a place where he could focus on work, investments, and planning for the future. He had designed spaces for reflection, creativity, and productivity, and he spent hours there each day, refining his skills and building his wealth quietly but steadily. Hank, the neighbor, stopped by one afternoon carrying a basket of freshly picked apples from his own trees. "You've done wonders with this place, Ethan," he said, eyes scanning the garden and cabin. "It's unbelievable. Clara doesn't know what she missed." Ethan chuckled softly. "She doesn't need to. This is for me." Hank nodded, understanding perfectly. That's the best kind of victory. Quiet, steady, and undeniable. The day passed with Ethan checking on his investments and attending to minor improvements around the property. Each decision was deliberate, each action intentional. The cabin was no longer just a home. It was a reflection of his mindset, his priorities, and his growth at BY late afternoon. He decided to take a walk along the newly built trail that wound to the surrounding forest. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the path. He breathed deeply, feeling a profound sense of peace. In this place, he had rebuilt not just a property, but his confidence, resilience, and purpose. Later, he sat on the porch swing with the dog by his side, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of a life well constructed. He thought about the journey, the divorce, Clara's mockery of the broken cabin, and the months of hard work and strategy that had brought him here. Each challenge had shaped him, honed his character, and prepared him for this moment of triumph. Ethan's phone buzzed, a notification from his financial advisor. He checked it casually, seeing that his investments had grown steadily once again. The numbers were impressive, but they were secondary to the life he had built around them. Wealth was a tool, not a trophy, and he had used it wisely to create freedom and stability. Evening approached, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ethan lit the lanterns along the path, their soft glow illuminating the garden and pond. The cabin, now fully transformed, radiated warmth and sophistication. It was a place of pride, a sanctuary, and a tangible reminder that adversity could be transformed into opportunity. He thought briefly of Clara again, imagining her life back in city. The lessons she had learned, the humility, the realization of underestimating him, were hers to carry. He didn't feel anger or bitterness. He felt peace. He had not only survived but had thrived, turning every obstacle into a stepping stone. As night fell, Ethan stood on the porch, gazing at the starry sky. The world felt vast and full of possibility. He had reclaimed control over his life, built a home that reflected his vision, and secured wealth that ensured freedom and security. For the first time in years, he felt complete. The dog nuzzled his side, bringing him back to the present. Ethan smiled, patting its head. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said softly. The cabin, once a symbol of humiliation and loss, had become a testament to resilience, patience, and quiet power. Every corner, every detail, spoke of a life intentionally built, of a man who refused to be defeated by circumstance or the judgment of others. Ethan reflected on the path that had brought him here. He remembered the broken floors, the peeling wallpaper, and the mockery that had once filled the air. And now, Standing amid flourishing gardens, elegant interiors, and a fully realized retreat, he realized that the true victory had never been about Clara. It had been about himself. He allowed himself one final moment of satisfaction, knowing that the laughter she had once directed at him had long been replaced by a quiet, unshakable triumph. The cabin was no longer just a home. It was a legacy of resilience and vision. Ethan sat back in the porch swing, the stars twinkling above, and whispered to himself, "This is life, the life I built, strong, independent, and unstoppable." The dog rested its head on his lap, and together they watched the gentle ripples of the pond, the soft glow of the lanterns, and the culmination of months of dedication and perseverance. The journey had been long, the work hard, but the reward, a life rebuilt on his terms, was priceless. For Ethan, the cabin was more than a home. It was a symbol of triumph, a monument to patience, intelligence, and quiet power. And as he looked out at the peaceful landscape, he knew one thing with certainty. He had not only survived adversity, he had mastered it. The story that began with humiliation, mockery, and loss had reached its satisfying conclusion. Ethan had turned every challenge into opportunity, every setback into a lesson, and every laugh at his expense into motivation. The cabin, once broken, now stood as a shining testament to a man who refused to be defined by circumstance and who had built a life that no one could ever take away. Months had passed since Clara's visit to the cabin. The memory of her shock and regret lingered faintly, a reminder of how far Ethan had come. But life at the cabin had moved on, and so had he, quietly, confidently, and fully in control of his destiny. The mornings were serene. Ethan would wake before sunrise, stepping onto the porch to watch mist rise from the pond. The garden flourished under his care, the orchard's branches heavy with fruit, and the paths lined with lanterns still glowing faintly from the previous night. The air smelled of lavender and freshly turned earth, a sweet reminder that growth, both personal and physical, required time, patience, and care. The cabin had become more than a retreat. It was a sanctuary, a place where ideas could flourish, where investments could be managed, and where he could focus on building a life beyond limitation. The $100 million inheritance had provided a foundation, but it was his determination, vision, and skill that had elevated it into something tangible, meaningful, and lasting. Ethan often reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The divorce, the mockery, the laughter, the broken cabin. They had all played a role. The humiliation he had endured had fueled quiet determination rather than resentment. Each challenge, each setback, had been transformed into an opportunity. And every nail, every coat of paint, every planted flower had been a step toward reclaiming his life fully. Hank, the neighbor, stopped by one late afternoon, carrying a basket of fresh herbs and baked bread. "You've really made this place remarkable, Ethan," he said, eyes scanning the property in awe. "It's like something out of a storybook. Clara, she'll never forget this. I promise you that." Ethan smiled faintly, shaking his head. "She doesn't need to. This isn't about her. This is about me. About building a life I can be proud of." Hank nodded knowingly. That's the right way to live. Quiet, steady, and focus on what matters. In the evenings, Ethan would sit by the fire, reviewing plans for future projects. He had begun mentoring young entrepreneurs, helping them understand the importance of resilience, patience, and strategic thinking. The cabin had become a hub not just for his personal life, but for growth and inspiration, a place where success was nurtured thoughtfully, not flaunted recklessly. Despite the wealth he now possessed, Ethan remained grounded. The $100 million inheritance had allowed him freedom, yes, but it had never changed his core values. Work ethic, integrity, patience, and vision were the principles that guided him. Each addition to the cabin, each improvement to the land, reflected not only his resources, but also his dedication and creativity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Ethan stood on the porch, the dog by his side. He felt a profound sense of peace. The world was vast, full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, he felt fully in control of his life. The cabin, once a symbol of humiliation and loss, had become a monument to triumph, vision, and personal growth. Each corner told a story of resilience. The walls echoed quiet victories. The garden bloomed with determination. Even the little details, the swing on the porch, the lanterns lining the path, The carefully restored guest house spoke of his patience and foresight. Clara's laughter, which had once cut deep, now felt distant, almost irrelevant. She had been a chapter in his life, a test of patience and perspective. But Ethan had risen above the need for vengeance. He had shown that true power was not in mocking others, not in holding grudges, but in building a life so compelling and strong that no one could diminish it. Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had taken what could have been humiliation and turned it into opportunity. He had taken the broken remnants of a life left for him and transformed it into something extraordinary. And most importantly, he had grown, not just in wealth or skill, but in patience, resilience, and clarity. The cabin was now more than a home. It was a symbol of mastery over circumstance, a life built deliberately, thoughtfully, and beautifully. Every sunrise, every breeze, every reflection in the pond reminded him that he had reclaimed not just property, but dignity, freedom, and peace. And as night fell, stars twinkling above the cabin and lanterns casting gentle light along the paths, Ethan whispered to himself, "This is the life I was meant to live." In the distance, the world continued busy, loud, chaotic. But here, in this sanctuary he built, Ethan had everything he needed. The cabin, the land, the success, the freedom. It was all his, a testament to what patience, determination, and intelligence could achieve. Clara, if she ever returned, would see only the evidence of what she had underestimated. A man who had risen far above expectation, not with anger, but with grace and vision. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest victory of all. Ethan leaned back on the porch swing. The dog curled at his feet and allowed himself to feel the quiet triumph that filled his heart. The story that had begun with a broken cabin, mockery, and lost pride had ended not with revenge, but with the elegant power of a life fully reclaimed. And in the glow of the lanterns and the shimmer of the pond, Ethan knew, without a doubt, that he had built more than a home. He had built a legacy. Thanks for joining Ethan's journey from a broken cabin to a $100 million triumph. If you loved the story, hit like, subscribe, and don't miss our next amazing tales of resilience and revenge.